Hey, welcome back. So in our last video, we started adding some CSS styles to our page loader animation here. In this video, what we're going to be doing is actually animating our different colored dots, as well as adding our own custom font to this percentage down below. So if that sounds good, let's go ahead and dive right in. I'm going to quit Safari. I'm going to come into my loading indicator folder, and I'm going to duplicate part 2, calling it part 3. Rename part 3, and I'm going to go ahead and open that inside of Visual Studio Code. Great. Inside of part 3, I'm going to come over to index.html. In here, I'm going to add a couple of new style sheets into our links. I'm going to copy this down below, and I'm going to change this name to assets.css. We want to create one more just below variables, and I'm going to call that animations.css. Animations.css, perfect. Command S to save. And inside of our CSS folder, we can go ahead and create those new files. So assets.css, that's number 1. Close that, come back to index.html. Make sure we have our CSS folder selected, create another new file, animations.css, perfect. Go ahead and close that one as well. The next thing we want to do is get our font for our loading percentage, and we want to go ahead and put that inside of assets.css. So I'm going to go ahead and get that off of Google Fonts. I'm going to navigate over to Google. I'm going to Google Fonts, come over here, and I'm going to search for Montserrat. Select this one right here, Montserrat. I'm going to scroll down, and I want the black version with a weight of 900. I'm going to go ahead and select that. Now you see we have two options here. We have link and import. I'm going to select import, and I'm going to select everything inside of the style tag, not including the style tag. I'm going to Command C to copy. I'm going to come back over to Visual Studio Code, and I am going to paste that right in there. Command S to save. Next up, I'm going to direct my attention back over to Safari for just a moment. Right here, you can see we have a font family attribute that we can use inside of our style sheets. I'm going to copy this right here, not including the font family part, so Command C. I'm going to come back over to Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to go into variables. We are going to create a new section here for font variables, closing that off. Oops. And down here, we can just define a new variable called primary font, and paste that right in there. I'm going to add a separator line down here just to close that off, and Command S to save. Now for the moment we no longer need Safari, so I'm going to go ahead and quit that, and I'm going to come over to loader.css. Down here we can change the font family attribute, font family, and we can make a new call to the var function built into CSS, just passing in primary font. Command S to save. I'm going to go ahead and minimize Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to come into my part 3 folder. If we open up index.html inside of Safari, you can see that we now have our custom font in effect here. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and minimize Safari now, close my Finder, and come back over to Visual Studio Code. From here, I'm going to direct my attention into animations.css. The way we're going to be handling our animations is with something called CSS keyframes. So before we get started with that, I'll show you where that lives on the internet. I'm going to open a new window here, go over to Google, and I'm going to Google CSS keyframes. coming to this first link right here, developer.mozilla.org at keyframes. Right here, you see we specify a name for our keyframes animation, and in here we specify different stops on our animation timeline. You can use from and to. If you scroll down, you can see you can also use different percentages to customize your timeline even further. We are going to be using percentages. So with that in mind, I'm going to close this documentation page, and I am going to minimize my browser. Back inside of Visual Studio Code, I'm just going to make a comment right here. We're going to say .1 animation for page loader. Perfect. We can go ahead and close that comment. And below, I'm going to make a separator line just to keep things nice and tidy, putting in a bunch of hyphens. And right here, we can specify at keyframes, and we're going to call this .-1 loader -animation. And in here, we can specify a few different stops in our animation timeline. I'm going to say 0%, 50%, and 100%. 50% and 100%. Now, what do we want to do in here? We want to specify a transform, and we know that our first dot is translated -500%. So in addition to that, we want to tack on a rotation as well. So I'm going to say rotate at 0%, 0 degrees. And we also want to translate -500% just to keep the dot where it is. So -500%. I'm going to copy this and come down to our 50% stop, paste this. And here we want to change 0 degrees to 180 degrees. And on 100%, we want this to be 360 degrees. So I'm just going to paste that in, type that in right there. Command S to save. With that, I'm going to come over to loader.css. I am going to scroll down until we see our page loader.firstChild selector. And I'm going to specify an animation property on here. Animation, and we are going to say .1 -loader -animation, and we want to say 2 seconds, and we want it to loop infinitely. If I go ahead and Command S to save that, and I come back over to the browser and refresh, you can see our first dot is animating. Next up, we just need to get our other dots animating. So I'm going to minimize this window, come back over to Visual Studio Code, and back into our animations.css file. To save some time, I'm going to duplicate this entire thing, Command C, or Edit Copy. And I'm going to come below, Command V to paste, and we're just going to swap out the word 1 for 2. So .2 animation for page loader 2. Right there as well. Now the second one is translated -250 degrees, so we're going to say -250 all around, right here and right there. And we want this to be rotating in the opposite direction of the previous one, so we're going to go from 0 degrees to -180 degrees all the way to -360 degrees. I'm going to copy this again, Command C, Command V to paste, and we're going to swap out 2 for 3. 3. And for this one, we know that it is just translated +250%, so we can get rid of the negative sign there. And we also want it to be rotating in the negative direction, so we can just leave the rotate function like it is. I'm going to copy this again. And for the last one, we want to translate +500% all around. So I'm going to copy this, Command C, Command V right here, one more time. And this one is going to be rotating in a positive direction. Command S to save. I'm going to come back over to loader.css, and we can just add these different animations to our nth child selectors right here. So this is dot 2, 3, and 4. Command S to save. I'm going to come back over to Safari, and if we refresh, oops, it looks like I made a little mistake. Let's come back over here and back into animations.css. The culprit of the problem is all the way down here. I forgot to swap out 2 with 4, so I'm going to say 4 and change that in the comment up here as well. 4. Command S to save. And now if I come back over to Safari and refresh, everything is working as expected. Now I think that's a good place to stop for this video. I will see you in the next one. Stay tuned.